It's a week 4 showdown, Kansas State, UCF. Who has more on the line? Because there's a lot to discuss right here. We're going to do it on a Locked On College crossover.
You are Locked On College crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, let's break it down with a Locked On College crossover, Locked On Kansas State, and Locked On UCF. Mike Gittins, Christian Rao here to break it down and discuss game week, Kansas State and UCF. And who would have expected 3-0 UCF against 1-3 Kansas State? I mean, we definitely had that in our preseason rankings for sure. Lots of stuff to discuss on this episode today. We're going to dig into UCF because they played this past weekend. Kansas State had an off week. Talk about if Kansas State can bounce back. And are we really disrespecting Scott Frost in his return to Orlando? We're going to do all that good stuff right here. But before we do so, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is today's episode and is brought to you by it right now. New customers can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. Mike, you guys played this weekend and you played real good, taking down a legendary coach in Bill Belichick in the North Carolina Tar Heels 34-9 and moved to 3-0 on the season. How are you feeling?
I feel about how I thought I would feel. Now, let me tell you this. Before the season started, a lot of people were down in our own Locked On Big 12 poll. They got voted 15th.
They did.
Christian, 15th out of 16.
I'll even pop it up on the screen. Look at this. It's still on right here.
There you go. I was going to ask you if you had it. 15th. Now, who was 16th? Arizona.
Yeah.
Right? And I think Kansas State lost to Arizona already.
Yeah.
Right. And so the Big 12 has always been wide. It was always going to be very wide open headed into this season. So while 15th looks bad, the difference between 15th and 8th, there's not a lot of difference between those teams. I'll tell you that right now. So 4-8. Yeah, that was the start to the season. That was the season last year under Gus. But this team was better than the results. They took conference champion ASU down to the wire, probably should have beat Iowa State. There were a number of wins that were left out there. And so many people predicting that UCF would not make a bowl game this year. I just did not see it. And I said, I think the floor is 6 games for this team. Now they're halfway there, 3 games into the season. And suddenly that conference opener versus K-State doesn't seem so insurmountable. K-State, we'll get to it in a later segment here, looks human, but UCF just looks better than we thought they would look. It starts with Taven Jackson. They found their quarterback. Now, I will remind all the K-State Wildcats that are watching this, Taven Jackson did not even win the starting job in fall camp. Camp Fancher was named QB1, and then he got hurt. Taven came in. Me and my fellow guest, my most frequent guest, which is Andrew Glukov. He writes for our website, UCFNightZone.com. Go check out his written work there. But he and I predicted that Taven Jackson would win this job. So I was surprised to hear that Camp Fancher won it. But Taven has put a stranglehold on this after getting the job pretty much in the second quarter of game 1 versus Jacksonville State. And he hasn't given it back. Since then, we've seen him make play after play. His deep ball looks good. He's still a work in progress, but it is an upgrade from anything they had on the roster from a passing standpoint last year. Ja'Cory Brown is the incumbent that came over. Christian Ja'Cory is a dynamic runner. I mean, oh my goodness, he can run the football, but he couldn't hit the broad side of a barn last year throwing the football, which is why he ended up losing the starting job. UCF burned through 4 quarterbacks last year and no one got hurt. I'll say that again. They got to QB4 on the roster and there wasn't a single injury. It was all just play related. They got KJ Jefferson out of the portal, benched. They moved on to Ja'Cory Brown and EJ Colson, benched. And then they end up with Dylan Risk, and Risk is gone now.
Well, let me take it a little deeper here because Taven Jackson had a great game last Saturday. If you're looking at the stats again, they won 34-9 against North Carolina. He throws for 223 and a touchdown. He also leads the team in rushing with 10 rushes for 66 yards. It sounds like he is the offense, and it's crazy to see that he was not the guy that won it in camp. Now, we've seen this happen in the past with Big 12 schools. Like TCU did it in the past when they went to the national championship run. There's a whole bunch of teams that have done that. The teams don't have the quarterback that comes out of fall camp. They pick a different one later on, and they find some success. Is that the reason why you're seeing success? And with the fact of not trying to throw any shade here, because I'm not, I promise. We're talking about a team on my side that has lost to Army, almost lost to North Dakota, and then lost to Arizona. But the reason that you're 3-0, is it because of the competition level? North Carolina, they had a lot of hype this year, being the 33rd team, if you will, but they've obviously not lived up to that hype. And then the rest of your schedule, Jacksonville State, and I believe there's an FCS school in the middle there. What is your thought process on that? Is it the schedule, or is it actually just living up to the hype and actually a lot more talented than what we expected?
Two things can be true at one time. It is both the schedule, and it is that there was no hype. Let's be clear. There was no hype coming in to live up to. And so when the bar is on the floor, it's easy to exceed everybody's expectations. Now people are want to come through the back end and say, oh, but they didn't beat it. They haven't beat anybody. Well, if you were one of those people screaming that UCF wasn't going to make a bowl game, you didn't expect them to beat anybody. So they should be exceeding your expectations right now at 3-0. But it really all does come back to quarterback Taven Jackson. You mentioned how much of the offense he really is, but at the end of the day, Taven Jackson has been kind of the unexpected gift for UCF here. Now, versus North Carolina, who, by the way, is terrible. Shout out to our fellow show host, Isaac Shade. He came on and gave us some really realistic takes about what this game would be. Their quarterback, Gio Lopez, is not good. And UCF got after him defensively, and it showed. It showed. So when I'm looking at UCF, you asked the question, is it that they are better than expected? Is it just an easy schedule? Well, it is a little bit of an easy schedule, and they'll get a test on the road versus Kansas State. I think in the preseason, we thought that North Carolina would provide that test, but they ended up being so much worse than we expected that it's really hard. It's really hard to look at North Carolina and say, okay, well, that was a test. But you did clock a P4 non-conference win, and for a team that is aspiring to make a bowl game, that's a big deal. I will point out, though, Taven Jackson is 70% passing on the season. That's third in the Big 12 right now through 4 weeks. He 70.1%, 54 completions against 77 attempts. Number one is Cincinnati's Brendan Sorsby at 70.3, so he just edged out Taven. And Devin Dampier, 70.9. These guys aren't even a whole percentage point better in completion percentage than Taven Jackson. He is efficient. He's taking care of the football. He only has 3 interceptions, but he's thrown 0 interceptions.
So and he wasn't even the guy that won the job in fall camp. When you're talking about Big 12 quarterbacks and ranking them, you have this whole conversation this entire offseason saying there's no conference better than the quarterbacks in this conference. And then a guy who can't even win the job at a considered to be, with expectations, as you mentioned, a low-level team in the conference, a quarterback 2 doing the numbers that they have. Mike, you bring up the fact that expectations are, perceived to be you're overachieving right now. Being 3-0, a lot of people didn't have them being close to a bowl game. I remember when you and I talked this offseason, I had them with the fringe at that bowl game saying, I think they can make it. Now it seems like it's very easy, but those expectations are still not in the favor always as UCF. Way too early conversation here on a Monday, our first early game week preview, but our friends at FanDuel have Kansas State as a -5.5 point favorite for this one at UCF. How does that make you feel this Monday, being 3-0 and being the underdog in Manhattan?
Being within a score on the road, that is an absolute win. This line would have been much bigger chasm for UCF to jump 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Before anybody had seen them play football. So if you're Scott Frost, you're moving into a dangerous territory where God forbid, there might be actual expectations on you headed in to conference play. I think a lot of people accepted that this would be a rebuild for Scott Frost. And Christian,
Yeah.
Yes, it is a rebuild because you brought in a bunch of transfers from the portal. However, it was this, they were just never as bad as they were being coached. I keep saying this, and I know UCF fans are probably tired of hearing me say it by this point, but they acknowledge that is a good description of what the fan experience was like last year. UCF fans died a slow death under Gus Malzahn. Like a slow, painful Game of Thrones, Queen Cersei torturing you kind of death, right? Do you remember that? You remember that episode with the mountain when she catches the lady from the
Yep.
yeah, right? And she was like, "Oh, you're not gonna die today, baby," and the mountain's gonna tell you. That's what it felt like, and it was tough. I think it was really tough. I've now been a part of two fan bases who have died that slow, torturing death under Gus, and it sucks, man. But it sucks when you know everyone looked at 4-8. Nobody, for some reason, people weren't looking at how some of those 8-game losses ended.
Yeah,
they were
box
in
score
those
Warriors for sure. No doubt.
Beat Arizona State, the conference champs. They should have won that game. And
No
they
doubt.
gave BYU, I think, a little bit of a run after Dylan Risk came into the game late, but it was too far gone. And so this year, those games that were on the line, you have a chance to win for one specific reason that you cannot quantify in stats. As I mentioned, you died a slow death under Gus Malzahn, but Scott Frost brought hope back to Orlando. When hope dies in a program, coaches get fired. You know why? Because the people who give the money and write the checks and do the hiring and firing cannot afford for a hopeless fan base to disengage and stop showing up to games and stop buying tickets and stop buying merch and stop subscribing and giving to the competitive success fund for NIL. You can't afford that.
Yep.
So you had to go out and you had to make a hire that would bring hope back to the bounce house. That's what Scott Frost has done, and he's validated that by going 3-0. Has it looked perfect? No. They could have very well lost to Jacksonville State in that first game, but after they found their quarterback, they looked a lot better. You know, Charles Kelly's squad, former co-defensive coordinator Christian at Auburn, took the head coaching job at Jacksonville State. He got them up for that game defensively. Then you take a care of North Carolina A&T. There was a lot to take away from that game in terms of learning, but you still won 68-7 by 61 points. That's a sign of a well-coached football team that understood the assignment. And while they made a bunch of mistakes, they respected their opponent, and they came in and they beat them by 61. So they did the same thing versus North Carolina. They cannot afford to buy their own hype if there's any out there at this point. I think they understand that. And if you're Scott Frost, you got to just continue to dial it up and lean on what made you one of the hottest coaching names coming out in 2017 after you took UCF undefeated. And you've got to be in your bag calling plays, because these guys may not be the most talented, but they could be the most disciplined, and they could be the ones with the most heart. And they can't. And there's no stat that tells you that these guys have heart. You just have to watch the games and you have to see it. And the outcome will tell you the UCF Knights are going to be a formidable opponent for a lot of teams.
Well, I want to get to a break real quick. I want to talk more about Scott Frost in the future here, because I do think that we aren't talking about this team enough as a whole when it comes to college football, and maybe that changes after this game against Kansas State. But I want to go flip side here, and we got to talk about the Wildcats, because I thought this could be a game where they could bounce back, something that I've been saying for a few weeks now. Bounce back is getting a very tireless word in my vocabulary. Let's see if that's actually still true after this team is 3-0. We'll do that next right here on this Locked On College crossover of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On UCF. But first, Mike, I got to tell you about the game cap, and I really got to ask a quick question about all college football fans out here. If you could go back in time and sit front row at your school's biggest rivalry game, what hat would you be wearing? Yeah, I said hat. For me, it would be the game. I'm rocking one right now. I got another purple one sitting up on my hat rack at the moment. These aren't just hats. These are really awesome vintage style fan hat wore back in the 80s and 90s. And that's really our era right there, right? We get to talk the era of some of our old heads in the game right now. They still go for the same price they did back then too. That's the best part about these hats. Not only is the quality great, not only are you have the nice brims, I love it, they have good stuff. And when you use code LOCKEDON, you can get a vintage hat for just $16.99. There's not many things in the world right now you can get for $16.99. So if you head to thegamecaps.com, that's thegamecaps.com, you can get them for $16.99 with code LOCKEDON. Grab your team's classic bar or retro circle design and use code LOCKEDON for an exclusive discount, because legends wear the game. We're back with a Locked On College crossover, Locked On UCF, Locked On Kansas State. We just dug into UCF beating the brakes off of North Carolina. I mean, that was an interesting game to say the least. I mean, when I went through the box score after watching the game, looking at the Big 12 standings, UCF is sitting at the top, 3-0, with the exception of Iowa State and a couple other teams who actually have conference wins, but they haven't lost the game. That's what I'm getting at. I would have never expected that to happen, Mike. Actually, when I'm talking, now let's go a farther step back in the offseason. Of course, Kansas State is not living up to their potential whatsoever. They're 1-3. They almost lost to North Dakota. They're only one of the season, an FCS opponent. It took them to the final drive of the game to get that game. I've gone on record to say they should be 0-4 right now, but it's football, baby. You got a way to get one win, but you haven't got those other ones against Army, Arizona. They are looking for a way to bounce back. They have the talent on this team. I truly believe that. I'm not going the other way and saying this talent's not there. Chris Klieman, the head coach of this squad, has talked about the execution and discipline, something you said is very good on UCF, is lacking on this team. I'm hoping they can find a bounce back. And when I look at the rest of the schedule, with the exception of Oklahoma State later on in the season, my mind says UCF is the best shot for them to get back on par. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that would have been a popular sentiment earlier this season. Now I'm not so sure. Now, let me explain myself. Relative to expectations coming into the season, UCF, like making a bowl game, would have been considered a great season for them. For Kansas State, they were one of a few teams last year that had a legitimate shot at the playoffs. Now, here's what sucks about that. You returned quarterback Avery Johnson, right? And he has underwhelmed so far this season. And that's terrible for Kansas State. So only a 60.5% completion percentage, 60.6, I'm sorry. That's the fourth worst mark in the Big 12. The difference between these two teams offensively is quarterback. So you've got Avery Johnson at 60%, and you've got Taven Jackson sitting at 70%. I don't know, man. Defensively, UCF is somewhat formidable. So I don't know that they necessarily represent the biggest opportunity for Kansas State to bounce back right now. There may be some others on that schedule. As it fleshes out, we're going to see some teams are better than we thought they were going to be, and some teams are worse. Now, you may feel the urgency of it because you've started 1-3, and now what looked like an automatic dub does not look as promising. And one of the reasons it doesn't look promising is when you look like as a team, when you look on offense, Kansas State is the worst offense in the Big 12 right now through 4 weeks.
Easily.
That's a surprising result.
I don't know. Oklahoma State actually might take the cake there. They got a lot of 3 and outs. Maybe they might take it. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's 3. I mean, you're right. It's a battle for the bottom.
Yeah, that's not a good battle to be in.
Yeah, 320 yards per game for Kansas State, 324.3 yards per game for Oklahoma State. So, yes, you could argue, hey, look, they are not. They're both just not good. And it's not particularly close when you look at that. But
the run game's been non-existent for Kansas State as well. And I want to continue on your thought in a minute, but I got to give just a small little bit of pushback here. I think my Kansas State faithful would think differently of me if I didn't, but I don't think that Avery Johnson's playing, dare I say, a terrible season. Yes, the completion number looks awful when you look at it now in retrospect, but he was 44% against Arizona. It was a bad game, 60% against Army. But in some of those other games earlier this season, he was actually pretty good when it came to that completion rating. So I want to give him just a small benefit of the doubt here. Not trying to make excuses on this podcast. We don't do that here. But there also has been a ton, Mike, a ton of wide receiver drops, and it has been so bad. So I hate to be, although it's so easy to do, point at the quarterback and say that is the wrong portion here. It's tough for me as a Kansas State guy who have watched every one of these single plays to say it's Avery Johnson. I think it's the surrounding cast, one who I thought was going to be much improved, not living up to the challenge.
Yeah, it's everything relative to expectations, right, Christian?
Yeah.
So relative
to
the playoff expectations, it is terrible right now. The result now, as you mentioned, I watched the opener in Dublin with Iowa State. I didn't see two well-coached football teams. Is not what I saw there. It was a close result, but it was not good football, and that's disappointing when you return key guys like Avery Johnson and. You talked about that 44% completion percentage. One of the things that has shocked me is that the floor, like the ceiling is there, I think, but the floor
for sure.
being that low is what is the surprising part. I don't expect him to go out and be 40-something% in any football game. So whether it's, flat out drops by the wide receivers or, timing or ball placement, I just thought the floor would be much higher for them offensively than what we're seeing. And when you cannot execute on offense, less talented teams can beat you. And that's where, if you're UCF, you got to try to close the gap. Every time they fail to execute, you got to go out and execute.
For the sake of not trying to contradict myself, I do want to say also one more thing to this. Although I don't think that Avery Johnson is the exact person to point and blame at. And I know completion percentage is something that we love to look at with Avery Johnson. It's been a thing we've done for years now since he's been the starting quarterback of this team. And as much as I say it's the surrounding cast, he is coming off probably his worst game in a Kansas State uniform last week. And I think you have to call it as you see it and say that's the case. 44% completion rating. There was some that weren't his fault, but there were other decisions that Avery Johnson made that weren't great whatsoever. There were some times where he should have took off and run with the football, should have found himself probably past the sticks, getting first downs, but instead he decides to make unbalanced throws. His hips aren't in the right position and throws short passes that become incompletions. They wind up having to punt. And just that's a scenario I continue to bring up on my channel just as one of them. But there are multiple scenarios that happen with Avery Johnson. Play calling has been a question for Kansas State all season long, with Matt Wells being the offensive coordinator. But of course, it won't matter what the play calling is. You have to execute. Talent has to step up, execution, and so does discipline. All those three phases that we continue to keep hearing from this coaching staff. Can it happen against UCF? That's the biggest question, because we have an entire week to discuss it. I want to get more into that. We should continue to dive into it, Mike. You want to add more to it? Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just drop one more thing to you about Avery Johnson, right? To further your point about him, he recorded 11 drops on the season is devastating to your completion percentage.
And I would say it might be a little more too. There might be some statistically not be seen as drops, but like 11 seems even low, like just from watching the games.
Yeah, but Pro Football Focus recorded 11, Christian. So
in 4 games.
Why that's particularly disappointing is that Pro Football Focus, he is under pressure on only 24.6% of his dropbacks. That mark is good for third. He's the third most protected quarterback in the Big 12 right now. So to have that many drops while you're being given time to throw, and his time to throw is, when kept clean, is under 2.4 seconds. So for those of you who don't know, average time to throw in Power 4 play when kept clean is around about 2.5 seconds. If you're getting the ball out of your hand 2.5 seconds, you got a chance to make some plays. If you're holding it onto it longer than that, and your name's not Cam Newton or Joe Burrow, it's probably going to be a disaster, because we see that completion percentage under pressure fall off to 40 or below for most quarterbacks. The better quarterbacks in the league, better than 50% when under pressure. So I just want to make sure we have that as a talking point here moving forward about Avery Johnson and this offense. You catch those 10 balls, you might have a very, very different result so far in some
100%.
of these games this season. But his adjusted completion percentage of 78.7% tells the story for me, about the offense. So you call it timing.
It goes all back to what you said about the ceiling of Avery Johnson.
Yeah. But the floor, right? Turnover-worthy plays. They've got 10 turnover-worthy plays for the quarterback so far, which means you are also putting the ball in harm's way. And so there's enough blame to be
six of them were in North Dakota. Yeah, a game that they should have not let a team stick around. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Yeah, this team is not perfect whatsoever. They're underachieving. And again, going back to the three buzzwords that we keep hearing from Kansas State, is it talent? I don't agree with that. I think there's plenty of talent on this team, but execution and discipline, both on the play calling and the players, is a big issue. And dare I say, is it disrespect? I don't know. And we should probably continue with asking if it's disrespect, and we should talk about Scott Frost. Are we disrespecting the return of him to UCF? We'll do that next to finish up this Locked On College crossover of Locked On UCF and Locked On Kansas State. But first, I got to talk to you about FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets across the app. I know I said NFL just started, but we were already talking about this way too early odds for Kansas State UCF on the earlier segments. 5.5-point favorite is Kansas State at the moment, as of right now, as of Monday morning. But here's something that really gets me, Mike. It's only an over-under of 49.5 points. I feel like that's really low for both these teams.
Yeah, look, I think it is very low, but UCF defensively, I don't know, man. I think they have an opportunity here. We talked about those points per game, those yards per game, to make this a low-scoring one.
I want to see if how much that line moves over the week, because I'm sure it's not sitting where it is now. So if you like those numbers, get them in now. And if you are ready to play, download the FanDuel app today by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place that first $5 bet. This episode of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On UCF is brought to you by Square. It's the episode that brought to you by Square. Your favorite neighborhood spot runs on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your order by heart, or that corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. So you can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spots. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. Is Scott Frost being disrespected by UCF? And I shouldn't say UCF. I should say by the entire world of college football since coming back to UCF. Because look, I'll be the first one to tell you, Mike, I said I think Scott Frost is going to get this team in the right shape, but I think it's going to take time. Now you're talking about a team that's 3-0, and it's hard for me to say, well, he still needs time when I'm speaking as a Locked On Kansas State host of a 1-3 team over on my side of neck of the woods. So I want to ask you, as the local expert here on Locked On UCF, are we disrespecting the return of Scott Frost? His first time in the Big 12, yes, but are we disrespecting him, or is it maybe a not so fast, my friend moment? We have to wait and see a little bit longer before we make that decision.
When you go 4-8, a lot of things fly under the radar. UCF at 4-8 had the second best running back in college football last year, in RJ Harvey. I'll die on that hill. We argued, me and Andrew did, about whether he was a first-round draft pick talent. And I said he won't get taken in the first round, but I feel like he's got that sort of talent. Andrew says, I don't think so. Well, they took him high second round. Like, he was one of the first players off the board in the second round in the NFL draft. Somebody got a steal. And if you haven't seen
perfect fit with Sean Payton. Perfect fit with Sean Payton in the Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, 6.8 yards per carry he averaged last year. 6.8. The number one was Ashton Genty at 7 yards per carry. Close behind Omarion Hampton, North Carolina, and Jarquez Hunter, 6.4 yards per carry last year. I think there was one back at 6.6.
Yeah, but DJ Giddens right back there too.
Yes, I think he was 6.6. Yeah. I would say this. Harvey just got so overlooked because UCF was 4-8, but he wasn't the only one that got overlooked. There was a ton of talent on that team last year that just wasn't going to get a look at on a 4-8 football team. When you are losing, everything suffers, Christian. The perception of your players suffer, your draft numbers suffer. I mean, your guys just don't get noticed. And it's true for SEC programs. Yeah, you guys know I cover another school, and only a couple players drafted because they were losers. You are what your record says you are. 5-7, they were losers. 4-8, you're losers. And if you're Scott Frost, your mission was to come in and change that losing mentality. How do I get these guys to prepare like champions, believe they're going to win every game, come in, put the work in, and then let the work pay off on Saturdays? Is Scott Frost have people disrespected Scott Frost? No, I think people have disrespected UCF. And Scott Frost inherited a very disrespected program that had been run into the ground and needed new life. I'll go back to something I said earlier in the show. He has brought hope back to Orlando. Hope is a very powerful thing. When a fan base hopes in the fourth quarter, they are loud. When they're hopeful, they are screaming at the top of their lungs, and you have one of the most intimidating home environments for opposing teams. When the fans are tight and they're just waiting on you to lose it, they're a little quiet. They're a few decibels quieter. You know, their pocketbooks are not as loose. People were flying into Orlando. We were getting these in our comments. Saying, I'm flying in from the game from halfway across the country. They were so excited, potentially, based on what they put on tape the first 2 games. That's crazy.
Is it a good feeling because of what you know that Scott Frost has given to this program in the past? Or is it because they see the true potential moving forward? Like, what is it? Because, I mean, Gus Malzahn, of course, being the head coach last year, now you see him having instant success as the offensive coordinator at Florida State, a team that went 2-10 last year as well. Of course, it probably is a lot easier to not really pay attention to that when you're 3-0, but you also got to think it's happening in state, right? It's to another Power 4 school in state where you're seeing this much success. And then you have to think, why couldn't that have happened here at UCF? But of course, with Scott Frost being back, so much history, getting them to that undefeated season just less than a decade ago. What is it that fans are feeling right now?
Well, to address your Gus comment, let me tell you something. First of all, he had Castellanos at UCF and refused to play him. UCF fans all over our comment section saying very frustrating to see him cooking up Bama.
So just missed the mark there.
With a quarterback he refused to play that he had at UCF. So I just want to start there. Some guys are better as coordinators than they are as CEOs of an entire program. And then you have coaches like Lane Kiffin who just say, look, yes, I'm the coach, but I'm not giving up play calling because I'm one of the best play callers there is. The Gus's system just doesn't work without his quarterback. Unfortunately for UCF fans, he has a very poor track record at picking that guy, but he's just got lucky a few years with some transfers. I don't know that he's ever developed a freshman QB. I don't know if it's ever happened. A guy he recruited from high school that turned out to be the guy. He came in, he had Bo for 2 years. Then Bo transferred to Oregon and almost won a Heisman. He did come in close to that at his first school under Gus. So that means now that I've laid the foundation for that to what Scott Frost is, Frost goes out, he keeps Ja'Cory Brown, the incumbent QB, and he goes out and he gets Taven Jackson from Indiana and Cam Fancher from Florida Atlantic. And he has a tight quarterback race. He gets in and he says the coach speak thing. He says, you know what? We feel like we can win with all 3 of these guys. No, you don't. You don't feel good about any of these quarterbacks, but you know you got to develop one. So they pick Cam Fancher, and he looks terrible versus Jackson State for a quarter and a half. He gets hit on a busted protection, and he's out of the game. And Taven Jackson comes in, and He has one rough drive and then goes like 18 for 24 and they win the game. And so now you have your guy, and he got to his guy quickly, but he left open the possibility that the QB race could extend into the first couple games of the season. So Taven Jackson was in some ways always going to play in these first few games because you had, FCS cupcakes essentially to start your season. And good coaches just, I don't know whether you call it luck or whatever, they always just kind of land on their guy. His quarterback coach is Mackenzie Milton, the QB of that undefeated season in 2017. Yeah. And these guys are cooking up with Taven looks confident, man. He looks in control. And he's got a group of wide receivers that he really likes. He was bragging on these guys in the lead up to the season and in fall camp. So I am telling you right now, Scott Frost was always going to surprise a lot of people because the expectations for his program were what the results were last year. Mm-hmm. And you had to look just a little bit deeper to say, you know what? With some better play calling and the right QB, this team is 3 wins better, from 4 to 7 wins. And so it's going to look like this huge astronomical jump. But the truth was they were just never that bad. So, yes, I think that there's some disrespect there, but it's more for UCF as a program than it is for Scott Frost. I think there's a lot of respect for Scott Frost. He was one of the hottest names in coaching coming out of UCF. And this program, Heupel came through UCF. So there's some big names have come through this program as a stepping stone to schools where you could potentially win a national championship. Now, UCF is one of those schools. If 2017 happens in the college football playoff era we have now, UCF is not only in the playoffs, they probably got a bye.
Good point.
Undefeated, right? Like conference champion from a Power 4 conference. So I think that the perception of disrespect, if they beat Kansas State, it's going to go away. Now everyone takes you seriously. And you're going to be the hunted and not the hunter if you win this game versus Kansas State. That's just my thought on it. You gain a lot of respect if you win this game.
I love it. I'm a little nervous for it, not going to lie, just because Kansas State has not been able to live up to their expectations so far. A team hasn't lost yet, so college football, you never know what can expect. But going into Manhattan, hopefully that changes some things, and I have some faith in Kansas State. We have a lot to talk about. If you can tell this one went a little long, that's okay, because we are going to be back here on Thursday. Mike and I are going to give you another crossover before the game on Saturday. We're going to dive deep into this one. He's going to tell me what it needs to take for UCF to win and beat Avery Johnson. I'm going to go on the flip side and talk about all the keys to victory for Kansas State to get back on the wagon. We're going to do that on Thursday, so be sure to hit the like and subscribe wherever you're listening. Be sure to check out Locked On UCF, Locked On Kansas State, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast, because we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Mike, let's get on out of here. I can't wait to have a bigger conversation with you on Thursday, but where can everyone else find your work on UCF Nights?
Yeah, head on over to YouTube and subscribe to Locked On UCF on YouTube, guys. We appreciate all the support. We're on the move here. So we just crossed 1,000 subs last month. We just crossed 1,100 subs yesterday. We need to cross 1,200 subs here pretty soon, but we appreciate the support as always. And do us a favor, go read our written work at UCFnightzone.com. We're talking about it on YouTube, but we're also writing on it there. Myself and my senior writer, Andrew Glukov.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely. All right. Like the video, please subscribe. We'll see you back here next time on this Locked On College crossover of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On UCF.